Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Nate, and welcome back to another weather forecast discussion, this time for March 23rd, 2023. Now, we are starting to get into the thick of spring, which means that we are going to start to get more active with our weather patterns. And so, because of that, without further ado, we're going to continue to go and talk about what we have been mentioning with our previous videos, this next batch of severe weather towards the end of the week. So, before we get started, please be sure to hit that like button down below and subscribe if you are new. Now, we'll start with the day one convective outlook here. Today is a 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale for portions of Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, as well as Indiana. If you're in those areas specifically, I would just watch out for some marginal hail, maybe even some strong damaging winds is definitely possible within those areas. We'll move off to tomorrow. That'll be Thursday, and it's kind of the beginning of our severe weather setup here. We've got an entire elongated area here of a 1 out of 5 in the severe weather scale in the dark green. We also have a 2 out of 5 in the severe weather scale to where there could potentially be some damaging winds and large hail within those areas. And we'll show you here that there is a hatched risk for large hail, which means we could see hail in upwards of 2 inches in diameter in some spots, all across the board from the border of Mexico and Texas along that dry line all the way up into Oklahoma City and maybe even Tulsa. You can look and see the wind threat is not as significant, and neither is that tornado threat, but there is a localized threat for tornadoes there. We're talking the early afternoon, or I should say the late afternoon into the early evening, and maybe even into the overnight hours. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. We'll get into Friday's risk here, which is a little bit more significant. We have our 3 out of 5 in the severe weather scale that has now been introduced into portions of central Louisiana into southeastern Arkansas, as well as central to western Mississippi. And if you live in those areas, you guys should definitely watch out. If you live in the yellow areas, I would even recommend you guys watch out, as the potential for a pretty widespread event is possible across the board in some of these areas. So just something to note as this moves on through. We do have the risk for significant stuff to potentially happen, as well as we do have our significant severe risk, our hatched risk, localized over here in portions of Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and extreme eastern Texas. Now, for the people who are new to my video series, we usually start with the 500 millibar wind shear, which is essentially where our jet stream starts. This is winds 6 kilometers above ground level, and you can see that we have a very strong dip in the jet stream right here. This is what we like to call a trough, where the winds start to curl down and then back around. And this right here can also signify that we also have a low pressure system with it. And that's usually what happens whenever there's a dip in the jet stream like that, which is accompanied by a low pressure system. To counter that, we also have a high pressure system over here localized over southern Texas. This is also going to kind of move a bit further towards the north and east, and it's also going to follow our low pressure system, or not exactly behind it, but it's going to kind of parallel it off towards the north and east. So watch this here. As we get into Thursday and into Friday, notice our wind shear starts to become a lot more significant, and you can see that we have a lot more of a prominent dip right within here, and you can see over the areas that we are specifically trying to watch, we have some pretty strong wind shear aloft, which can help aid into thunderstorm ventilation, which is what you need for strong to significant severe thunderstorms. Once again, we have our high pressure system right here. This is also going to create a clockwise flow, which will aid moisture fueling some of these thunderstorms. All right, so when you have this counterclockwise flow with our low pressure system here, this can kind of help get some moisture. But if you have a high pressure system on the eastern side of the trough, you can see that with dual flow that is moving in the same direction, a lot of this moisture is going to be streamlining right over the areas to watch over the next couple of days. You'll see here, as we go from Wednesday into Thursday, you can see there's already an abundance of moisture in place across the board. As far north as central Missouri and southeastern Kansas, to as far south as, well, I mean, it covers the majority of Texas into Mexico, with the exception of central and western Mexico. This is a very expansive warm sector here across the board. We move off into Thursday, and Thursday has a really interesting event here because you have your warm front right here. This is your warm front, which doesn't allow any other moisture to go further north. You also have a bit of a dry line back here, but there really isn't as much forcing back here on the dry line, which means there may not be as expansive of showers and thunderstorms as you may think it could be. So if there's 1 or 2 thunderstorms that form, those are the ones that are going to probably be the more significant in regards to your large hail. But remember that we had our tornado risk situated over here, and this is right across the warm front. So if any of those storms that form along the warm front do anything, they could potentially try to spin up a couple of tornadoes. We'll move over to the energy levels here, our convective available potential energy, and you can start to see that as we get into the thick of things on Thursday. Note that we do have an abundance of energy localized along the dry line back here, and we do have a little bit of it right along the warm front. So if anything does form along there, they could sustain. And you can see that as we get to our helicity values, this is our streamwise vorticity more or less, to which can help aid tornado genesis. This continues to expand further along that warm front here as you get into the overnight hours. So you see over here along that same warm front, helicity values are a bit higher, but along that dry line, there's next to nothing over there. So expect very large hail along the dry line over there if storms do form. This is central to west central Texas, and then anything over here in Oklahoma and in northern Texas. If there's anything that can root onto that warm front right there, we could potentially be talking about some severe weather in that area too. So how does this now play out? Well, here is your simulated radar from the North American model. And you can see as we go through Thursday, there isn't really much that happens, honestly. There's just not too much. I mean, you got some storms that form along the warm front over here. Maybe something near the triple point as well, near Lawton, as well as Frederick, Oklahoma. But you don't really get a lot of stuff along the dry line until the late evening into the overnight hours. We're talking past midnight here when you can actually finally get your showers and thunderstorms that form along the dry line. Now, don't be surprised if they form a lot earlier. As a matter of fact, the HRRR model, something similar to quality here, at least the quality of the model, you can see that it has a lot of storms that form into the early evening and into the overnight hours, just before midnight. So stuff on the warm front very well could do stuff. And then you see one or two storms that could potentially form over there near the Frederick, Oklahoma area. So something kind of interesting to note. And then you see the storms way after midnight start to become pretty widespread. Look at this, an entire line of storms that start to surge on through and could potentially continue to move off into north central Texas. So something to watch out for. The overnight hours of Thursday into Friday is when your large hail producers could start to form. Now let's move on to Friday. You can see that just because we had storms over there in Texas doesn't mean that all the other areas of moisture gets used. And as a matter of fact, that's exactly the case. We have a lot of moisture across the board in this area. Still got a dry line over here in central Texas, so if storms form over there, it'll produce some very large hail. But this is a very expansive open warm sector for thunderstorms to actually try and form or sustain. If we move off to the convective available potential energy, you can see the energy gets used up there for Thursday and into Friday. You can see that it starts to build right back up again. Along the dry line, we have an abundance of energy. But note, we do have an abundance of energy over here across the main area to watch as well. We're talking Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi. So something to kind of note there. And then after those storms really start to get going, then it'll start to turn into more of a wind threat, which will kind of transition over further and become more of a linear threat. So a linear wind threat, maybe some embedded circulations within the line, and that'll push off using the rest of the energy into much of Mississippi. Now we'll go back to our streamwise vorticity and our helicity values, and I want you to kind of note the big difference from Thursday, which is all the way over here, and all the way through into Friday. Here's Friday morning, and look, we have an abundance of helicity and vorticity across the board over here out in front of this dry line. So any storms that form within this helicity value is probably going to start to rotate across the board within this area. The big question here, however, is can they sustain? So I want to take a look at our relative humidity and stuff like that before we go into our simulated radar. And note that we have very high humidity values across the board, which means that because of that, there very well could be the chance for us to get cloud cover, which would mean that the sun would not be able to actually heat the ground and provide a lot more energy for this entire environment. So our lapse rates could be lacking. And a big way for us to kind of look at that is by comparing the different levels of the atmosphere and its temperature. So you guys have to remember, with convective available potential energy, if you have more warm air that rise and cold air that sinks, if you have a greater displacement between the two air parcels, you get higher amounts of energy, right? Well, let's take a look and see at the lower levels if there is a great displacement between those energy values or this levels of the atmosphere in regards to temperature. And so we can see on this side of the screen right here, so at the bottom part, this is your surface temperatures right over here. And over here, this is your 925 millibar temperatures, which is about a half a kilometer above ground level, all right? So note that at the surface, we have pretty warm temperatures out in front at about 24 to 25 degrees Celsius, even 21 degrees Celsius over here into portions of East Texas and central Louisiana. But note that aloft, it's not really as big of a drop off, all right? We have cool temperatures at the surface, and we have not as cooler temperatures. It's cooler than what it is at the surface, but it is not as much of a drop off over here in some areas, all right? And so because of that, the lapse rates, which is the ascension with height, the warm air that travels up in the sky, how quickly is it's going to travel is going to come into question. We don't have as much of a drop off, if you will. If the temperatures aloft were in some of these blue colors that are over here in Alabama, you know, if you guys can see on your right-hand portion of your screen, if it was in the 17, 16 degrees Celsius area, we could be talking about some pretty strong severe weather across the board. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't doubt it if that was the case. But because of the fact that it is pretty warm aloft, and it's pretty cool at the surface, I can't say for certain that these storms are going to be able to take in every single little thing in this environment, all the energy, all the vorticity, and be able to try and sustain. So that's a big thing there. And on the other hand, because of all of that humidity at the surface, we could see some over-convection. We could see over-mixing, which means that we could have a lot more storms that can actually fight for all that existing energy, which as of right now, as you guys already know, is kind of already on the lower end out in front of the dry line. So something to keep in mind with that. Regardless, here's the simulated reflectivity with the North American model. I'm going to be honest, I don't exactly trust the simulated reflectivity from the North American model, but it gives us a general idea as to what could potentially happen. So you'll see here Friday morning and into Friday night, pretty expansive dry line right here in East Texas. But I want you guys to note here, look at all these little thunderstorms that are forming out in front of the line. That is what we are going to be watching out for the most. And you can see that once we get into the evening hours, look at how widespread they become. So those are the types of storms that we are going to have to watch out for some significant tornado potential. It'll be late afternoon, evening, overnight threat for some of these areas, especially as you get further and further east. It'll be more and more into the overnight hours as you go along. Now let's see what's happening after this. We'll look at the Euro model and we'll see that as this storm moves on through here, it could create a lot of snow for the majority of the Midwest into the Great Lakes, as well as into the Northeast, so watch out for that. We're also talking Ontario and Quebec. You guys could potentially even see some freezing rain and some sleet across the board in those general areas, so watch out for that. And then after that storm moves on through, we're talking Sunday, the potential for a small area severe weather possible across the central United States and even the southeast. That could be something to watch out for. And then we also have to talk about what happens after that storm moves on through. Look at this, Tuesday into Wednesday, pretty strong storm complex over here for portions of the Northeast, potentially a nor'easter for some areas. And we're talking some more snow, rain, and wind across the board in New England. So watch out for that. And then just for giggles, we'll see what's happening towards the end of next week as well. Well, there's the potential for some more severe weather towards the end of next week. That one's not set in stone. As a matter of fact, from stuff after Sunday and on, it's not exactly set in stone. Stuff can shift around and models can change their minds. That's just the beauty of models. It's never accurate, especially when you're super far away from an event. So we'll just have to see how it works, and I'll keep you guys updated with all of that. More on this channel. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you are new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family, and on social media. Also follow me on social media. Link will be in the description down below. I have a Discord server. Please feel free to join that. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments, or if you want to directly contact me, go to Twitter or go to Discord. Stay safe, everyone, and I will catch you guys tomorrow. So peace out, everyone.